Alright, it's been a while since I've done a video at all, really, except for the previous one I posted, which was basically just a time lapse of this being built and then up till now with its growth and everything as far as the plants go. And I wanted to do this video today to talk about a couple of things. One of those things is algae, another thing is the water level. And right now we're in August, so for me, I call this midsummer, and we're sort of in a drought right now. Now, as far as like the yard goes, like the grass over here normally would be starting to go pretty brown if we were in like a bad drought, but we haven't had rain in a while, and we're not going to have rain in a while from now, at least not for, I think, 3 or 4 days. There's a chance of rain, but you can see now the pond level is dangerously low. So here's the intake. You can actually see the outline of the intake. These are net pots for plants, but I use them as filter screens. But you can see the water level is right at the level of that, and if it starts dropping even lower than that, the filter is going to start sucking in air. It's probably got another inch or two before that actually happens, but I wanted to talk about that. So the water level right now, as you see it, I have not added water to this pond all summer. And that's because I fixed the problem with the liner up in the bog area. And I'll talk about that in just a second here. But I did add water to this once earlier, I think either in the spring or the beginning of the summer. It wasn't because the water level was dropping because of evaporation. It was because of the spillover I was having with the liner on top of that bog area over there. But since then, we've had enough rain, which really wasn't that much. We have not had that much rain this summer. But that has added water to the pond when it did rain. But really, I have not had to turn on the water to add anything to it. I'm not using the well to fill anything up or anything. So the liner up here, I have gone through a few times, and along the edge there, the liner, you have rocks on this side, boulders on this side, and boulders on the other side of the liner. It comes up, and then in some spots it folds over for the excess, and some spots it sticks straight up. Usually about around 1.5 to 2 inches above the water level in this bog area. And part of the problem I was having, and it was kind of hard to find it, but I did go through along this whole edge here and move the liner up as high as I could and kind of reseed everything. And the problem that I found recently was right over in this section. It was kind of just like bent over just a little bit like that. And even though it wasn't really spilling over at that particular spot, it was only like about this far above the water level. And if you have any kind of backup here with the waterfall or anything like that, it's going to raise that water level up just a little bit and it'll spill over. That happened during the winter, I'm sure, because there was ice damming forming going on here because I never shut the waterfall off. But mainly over here. Let me get a little closer over here. So over here in this area here, this is where the output is for the air purge. So the pipe comes from the pump through this way. There's a T right here and a valve, and then it continues to go this way and then goes down to this side of the bog, which goes down 2 feet. Then it goes down to the bottom, and then it squirts at a 90-degree back this way to a bucket over here. It's actually 2 buckets. They're bottom to bottom, so it's the height of 2 buckets here, and then there's a lid for a clean out access. I have not cleaned it out. It's been 2 years now. I have not opened that up once to clean it out. Eventually I will, and I'll probably do a video on that. But it sprays this way at the bottom of the bog, and there's a perforated half pipe so the water can percolate up through the gravel, which acts as a filter, more of a biological than a mechanical filter, some mechanical, and then it goes out that way. The problem which you can see here is that you have all of this watercress growing in here. This acts as a filtration source to absorb nutrients out of the water column so that you reduce the amount of algae. We're going to get into that in a second here too. So the water flows through here very slowly. The plants, obviously, they are exposed to air, they got CO2, they got sunlight. They are growing with the nutrients that are in the water, and they're absorbing it out of there. The problem here is you see how much of it there is, and the water comes from back here as well. It's percolating up back here is what I mean. There's very little coming out of this pipe. This is not really adding a whole lot of water to this bog whatsoever. This is just a tiny trickle. That's just so if the pump shuts off in a power outage, it doesn't siphon all the water out of the bottom of the bog and suck all the debris back into the pond. This is an air brake so that the air gets sucked in through here when the pump shuts off and stops it from siphoning the bottom of the bog out. So what's actually happening is the water's percolating up from the bottom, and then it's percolating up back here as well, and then the water can't really flow this way fast enough to evacuate out of the bog, so the water level starts to creep up a little bit. And if it was to go above this pipe right here, that's visually you can see that it would be backing up. So I've done two things here. Over here in this spot here where I was telling you about how that pipe comes down this way, it goes down, but it has to go across over top of the liner at some point. And it was originally, when I built this, up high enough to where the water level wouldn't be coming up that high. It was at a taper, and then the pipe went over top of that and then down. Well, over time, that has pressed down. And I knew that would happen, the ground settles. And I tried to avoid that in a lot of places. But it still happened, and it settled down just enough where I didn't see it happening, but when I uncovered it, the water level was very close to that edge, and I was like, that makes perfect sense, because this water level would be backing up, raising up over here on this side of the bog, and it was spilling over there, especially during the winter. And I basically just uncovered all of that and pulled the pipe up as hard as I could, and then stuffed some rocks underneath there and changed that basically so it wasn't as bad. If it continues to do that in the future, I'll probably make it more of a permanent solution, but I didn't want to have to go into all that because I just didn't have time. But what I also did over here, you see this flex tubing here? This came from like another product that I bought. I didn't actually need it, so I kept it. So I took this piece here, I covered that pipe up that was to mitigate splashing during the winter and causing a bunch of icicles and everything, which works. But I had more of that pipe, and I laid it down in the middle of this bog here. Originally this was all open, there wasn't any plants growing here, this was all open flowing, it was fine. But I put up one of these pipes here from this side to the back side here, all the way around to that side, so the water from this side can actually flow through that tube, get past all of this, all these plants and roots and everything, and then flow out that side without backing up the back side of this. And so far throughout this whole summer, this has worked as a solution. I have not lost any water because I've not had to add any water to the pond. So I know it's working. The trick though is I have to make sure that nothing grows here to clog up that inlet of that pipe. And same thing with the outlet over there. Now you might be thinking like that kind of beats the whole purpose of having a bog and using plants for filtration, but the fact is that the water still is percolating up pretty evenly throughout the whole area here, not just on the backside. And it is still slowly moving through those plant roots and not just through the tube. And that is the reason why, getting into the next part here, that is the reason why I've not really had any algae problems this summer. This is probably the first year that I have not had any issues because the bog is working how it's supposed to work, which is filtering the nutrients out of the water column. Also, to have to add to that, I do not feed my fish. The fish in there, they survive off of whatever is in the pond, so I don't throw any food in there of any kind. It's just is as it is. I don't put anything into the water. And that's one of the tricks too, is if you feed your fish, if you're constantly putting food in there, well, you're going to be adding a lot more nutrient load to the water column, and then you're going to get more algae, especially green water. So the fish do just fine without feeding them. There's no reason to feed them. Now, if you have a lot of fish and you want to have more fish, the only way you're going to have more fish is to feed them. Otherwise, there won't be enough food to go around. But there's plenty of fish in here, and these guys here, they don't need to be fed whatsoever. They do just fine. They survive there all winter. The algae you're seeing here, I know I was just talking about algae, but the algae you're seeing here, you see all this that's kind of just growing on the rocks and everything. This here has not really changed all summer. Whatever you see here doesn't really grow or die. It's actually kind of in I don't know what I would call it, a form of growth and death at the same time. So this algae growing on the rocks here, it's basically dying as fast as it's growing. It's not really getting out of control, and that means it's in balance, and that's kind of where you want it to be. However, this would be the second time this summer that I've started to see every now and then you start seeing this more green algae. It's kind of hard to see here, but it'd be like this, it's the rest of this algae in the pond is like a very light green, almost brownish. But then every now and then I'll see a little bit of this darker green stuff pop up. It's not slime algae, it's hair algae, I think. So I'll see some of that here, and then I'll see more of it up here. I can show you this stuff here. It's this little bit of green stuff, and that's not bad whatsoever. But that stuff is actually growing now, and it could be for a bunch of various reasons. I'm not sure. Part of the reason I think is because the water level has dropped. There's a lot of evaporation that's happened, and so the nutrient density in the water has sort of increased because there's less water in there now. I think that might be a contributing factor to it. So what I'm going to do here, which I've already done once before, is I'm going to add some of the hydrogen peroxide. I did another video on that stuff, and it works very well. It's not a solution to any kind of problem. It's just to mitigate some algae pop-ups. So algae blooms, it'll take care of that. Down here you can see these other plants. I forget what you call these. These are not really root feeders. These feed more off the water column. I brought these back from another lake. It was about, I would say it was about within the first summer, the first few months of having the pond, and I planted them in there, and they never really took off growing because I had such bad algae problems that it would basically encapsulate those plants and then choke them out. They wouldn't be able to get any sunlight. And this is the first year they're actually growing and spreading. Like, there was only a couple little strands here in the spring, and now they've kind of spread down into the bottom there, and they're actually growing. Same thing with those other plants over there. So it is very helpful to get your pond in balance to not allow the algae to go out of control. But what I'm going to show you here as far as adding the hydrogen peroxide, this here is 12%. I get a gallon of it off Amazon. And I'll just dump it into the intake for the filter here so that it sort of disperses into the water as it flows through there. That way it doesn't cause any problems where if you were to dump it like out in the middle there, you don't get like a high concentration of peroxide that your fish swim through and potentially hurt them or burn them. So I dump it in there, and then it kind of just dilutes as it goes through the whole system before it goes back into the main area. Now by tomorrow, the algae I was showing you, particularly the stuff that was right here, the darker green stuff, the hair algae, and the stuff that's up there, that should basically be pretty much gone. So this stuff works. But as I said, this is not a solution. Putting peroxide is not a solution to fixing your algae problems. Your algae problems come from a excess of nutrients in your water column. And that's an indicator that you need to do something to fix it. So just dumping a bunch of this stuff to kill the algae doesn't do any good, because all that happens is that it's going to kill the algae on the spot, and then it's going to come right back because the algae, the nutrients that make up that algae, disperse back into the water column, and then it feeds more algae to grow more and more. It's just a cycle that keeps happening. So putting stuff in your pond to get rid of algae is not a solution by any means. You need to learn how to balance your pond by using the proper filtration. That doesn't mean using mechanical filtration. That means using biological filtration and not chemical filtration, because putting carbon in there isn't going to do anything. So you need plants to suck up those nutrients, and then it's also very important that if those plants start to die, such as in fall or during the winter, you need to remove them before they disintegrate back into the water, and then you get an algae bloom in spring. So it is sort of a form of constant maintenance, but once you get everything in balance, it becomes a lot easier. And I've done the same thing with fish tanks. I've had aquariums for I think almost 20 years, and this is really no different. It's just a little bit harder outside because there's a lot of variables that change. But fish tanks in a house, obviously, the only thing that changes in them is what you do to them. But outside environmental factors, you got sun intensity that changes, and then you also have other things like leaves and stuff falling into the pond. And of course, in this case, the fish also breed. So you get more fish in there, that's a bigger bio load, which means you would need more plants to absorb those nutrients out of the water column. One thing I also did that I wanted to mention before I close out this video is you can see here the waterfall is now at a more of a trickle. So basically what I've done with that is I've taken the pump and I used it's called a speed bully. And it's basically just a potentiometer for a motor or a fan. And I dialed it back. So the type of pump that I have in here, I believe it's called an induction pump. It's not a brushless motor, even though there's not really any brushes that turn it. Brushless is something you'd find in like drills and everything. It's an induction motor. So obviously not brushed, otherwise you can't have a brush motor underwater. So that can actually be turned down with a dial. It doesn't have to run at its full speed. It can actually be turned back by just lowering the voltage. It might actually work off pulse width modulation. I'm not sure if that's how that works or not, but I turned it back to basically reduce it down to like 50 volts or so that it's using from the wall, which is good because it actually uses less energy. But it's also better to have the water flowing slower through the bog area there so that it has time to absorb through the plants. And then also it's also beneficial because then you can manage the water better without the water backing up and flowing over the liner. That's mostly just in my case, but I guarantee if you build a pond, you're going to run into problems just like that unless you know what you're doing the first time. So that's it. I just wanted to make this video here to kind of give an update on the pond and how things are going. So thanks for watching. All right, it's 24 hours since I added that peroxide to the water, and you can see here where that dark green algae is now almost all disintegrated, and I mean some of it's still hanging onto the rock there, but it's basically like turned almost white at this point. And the same thing over on this side in the intake. All that dark green stuff is pretty much gone. There's still a little bit of fluffy stuff hanging around there, and that is sort of normal. It's kind of just always there, but the other stuff that was starting to bloom is gone at this point. Now you might be asking why, if my pond is in such good balance and the algae is under control, why would I even bother adding the peroxide to it, and why would the algae just randomly start to bloom? Well, to answer that question is, even though a pond such as this, like a small garden pond, might be in balance, part of the problem is that this is a relatively small volume of water. And in order to keep the balance, it would really just have to be indoors under controlled conditions. As I was talking about earlier in the video, part of the issue is that you have environmental factors that change. One of those factors is going to be heat. So the sun intensity, especially during the summer, is going to heat this water up, and you're going to constantly have these temperature swings. And then on top of that, you're also going to have drought, which the water level drops, so that will increase the density of the nutrients, as I discussed before. And then also you might have other factors like a fish might die or a snail might die in the water that you don't know about. It might just disintegrate, or the other fish eat it or partially eat it, or it might go all the way down to the bottom, be hidden in the algae, the normal algae anyways, and it will basically decay, and then whatever it makes up that livestock, the animal, and there's a little frog right over there actually too. I'll zoom in on it. And whatever makes up that animal is going to basically disintegrate into the water, and it's going to add to the bio load, at least temporarily. So what I'm getting at is, when stuff like that happens, when environmental factors change and other variables change, you might get a small algae bloom. And when there is a bio load that is that heavy, especially up in the bog area here, where all these plants are, it may not have the time to sort of absorb all of that out of the water and then, use it to grow. So what ends up happening is you start getting these algae blooms. Algae grows way faster than other plants do, and it's going to absorb stuff out of the water faster than the plant roots can. So when you use the peroxide, you destroy the algae that's growing in there. It will go back into the water column, and then hopefully the goal is that the plants, such as what's in the bog or just what's in the water in general, can absorb that out of the water and then use it to grow their leaves, and then remove all of that so the algae doesn't come back. I know that sounds kind of complicated, but that's sort of what's happening. If this was in a house, if this was just an aquarium, you wouldn't have to worry about that stuff as much. Especially if you had like a fish die, you're probably most of the time gonna see it. You can pull it out of there before it starts causing any kind of a problem. And as I said before, part of the issue is also the fact that this is a relatively small volume of water. My guess is this is around 600 gallons in here, between the bog and the main pond area, which isn't really that much when you consider how much debris is basically in that water. Debris counts as anything that's dead that was living, or sticks and leaves and algae that's decaying and growing. It all adds to the bioload over time, and it will continue to keep doing that in a cycle. It's easier to do that in a house, inside a house where it's a controlled environment. You can control the lighting, you control the temperature, where everything is a constant. You can't do that outside. So you're always going to get algae blooms, no matter how balanced your pond might be, just because environmental factors change. And adding something like hydrogen peroxide, which is very safe to use, because what ends up happening is that it just gets used up, and then there's really nothing left in the water that you need to worry about afterwards. If you go and buy chemicals and things like that and start putting stuff in there like that, that's the stuff that stays in there, and it's not necessarily good, because then you're going to be stuck in this other cycle that happens, which should be just high maintenance, having to keep adding more of that, and then you're going to be affecting your fish and your plants with other things too. So it is better just to try to keep things as natural as possible, and I only seldomly use the hydrogen peroxide. So I just wanted to add this to the video to kind of clear up a few things. I understand I probably left a few questions, so I hope that helps.